couple of hours of live TV.
The Kenny Report, exclusive to Sky News.
Let's go live to Canberra now. Richard Dennis is joining us. He's the Chief Economist at the Australia Institute. Good to see you, Richard. It's been too long between drinks. Let me ask you about this important set of data of the jobs figures that will be today. The RBA is keeping a very close eye on these. So will the market. What are you expecting?
Look, you know, we'll find out soon enough what actually happens, but the trend we're on is that unemployment is rising. That's why the Reserve Bank has not just cut interest rates to record lows, but cut them again. So the Reserve Bank is worried about the path we're on. The path we're on has got unemployment rising, so the most likely thing today is that we'll see unemployment rise slightly or stay about the same, but the problem we've got is that the economy is definitely slowing and the labour market is the pointy end of that problem.
How much of our slowing economy has to do with what's going on with the drought? There is a summit that is taking place in Dubbo today. The Prime Minister will be there. The opposition leader will be there. The Prime Minister wrote an opinion piece in the Daily Telegraph today talking about that specifically. What's your...
Oh, look, the farm industry, you know, employs a couple of % of Australians, and a small percentage of those people might lose their jobs in a particular drought. But most farms keep going during droughts, but they put off a lot of expenditure on new equipment and new machinery. So there's no doubt that droughts are bad for output from the farming sector. There's no doubt that it has some impact on employment in the farming sector, but you know, 97% of Australians don't work in agriculture, and the reason unemployment's rising has got a lot more explanations than the drought.
But I guess it's not just the farmers though; it's the businesses surrounding them. It's all the businesses in the community. So it kind of extends beyond agriculture, though. Yeah.
Oh, look, it does, but you know that's true of everything. I mean, you know, when we lay off public sector workers, they don't go shopping. When the car industry was shut down, all those buying things in the local economy as well. And you know, interestingly, we saw Nick Minchin out yesterday criticising his own colleagues for the end of the car industry in Australia. So again, there's no doubt that a drought is a bad thing for a farming community, but when 97% of people work outside of agriculture, agriculture can't explain why the unemployment rate's rising at the moment.
I know you probably can't believe it yourself, but we're still having a debate about increasing Newstart. There's no political imperative for the government to do so. That's the cynical view. The more realistic view is, I guess, that by increasing Newstart, it might have a stimulatory effect on the economy. Do you buy that?
Of course it would. There's no doubt about that. If we wanted to pump money into the economy, and that's a big if, but if we did want to do that, there's almost no group that would be more effective at stimulating the employed. Economists talk about something called the propensity to consume. That is, if I gave someone an extra $1, how much of that dollar would they spend? Well, unemployed people would spend every single cent of it. Whereas when we provide tax cuts to high-income earners, they save some of it and they spend some of it overseas, whereas the unemployed and indeed all low-income earners often spend more than 100% of their current income. That is, they have to borrow. So when we give them more income, we know they spend it, and we know they spend it in the domestic economy. But look, it's been 25 years. 25 years. Paul Keating was the last Prime Minister to give the unemployed a real pay rise in Australia. So I guess, you know, Scott Morrison can take his position in a long and distinguished queue of Prime Ministers that have thought the politics of helping the poorest Australians just aren't worth it.
Well, I mean, that if they're investing in infrastructure, then that's creating the jobs rather than give an increase to Newstart. So, I mean, that's the argument around the other way. That's a fair point, isn't it?
Oh, it's a point. I don't know if it's a fair point or not. I mean, Australia's one of the richest countries in the world. We hear
but
about how
merit.
we've had, you know... Oh, well, you said it's a fair point. I think fairness is an important issue here. We hear successive governments say how the economy's grown strongly. We haven't had a recession for 25 years, and not once in that period have we thought to look to the lowest income Australians, the absolute lowest income Australians, the people who might have lost their jobs when Ford moved offshore, the people who might have lost their jobs when Holden moved offshore, indeed the people who might have lost their job because of a drought. Those people are living on less than $15,000 a year. It's 25 years since we said maybe that's not enough. And sure, if we go spend some money on concrete in Sydney, that'll create a job for a construction worker in Sydney. There's no doubt about that. But it won't do a thing to help a labourer who was laid off in the farms that we were talking about before.
Richard, do you think, whilst we're looking at stagnant wages growth, is it a good time to increase the super guarantee from 9 to 12%? I know it's not due to happen for the next couple of years, but we're having the debate now.
Yeah, look, I don't know why we're having the debate now. I think there are bigger... Well, I don't. I think there are more pressing problems that we face. And if we're going to offer people a choice between a 3% wage rise or a 3% increase in their superannuation contribution, I think most people would prefer the wage rise, and I think the macroeconomy would benefit more from that wage rise. So the whole point of being in government is you get to set the agenda, you get to decide which order we discuss things in. So it does seem like bring this up.
Richard, one of the developing stories out of, from the international scene this morning is the leadership debate, the last leadership debate that's taking place in the United Kingdom at the moment. We've got Boris Johnson and we've had Jeremy Hunt sort of making their last pitches to become the next Prime Minister of Britain. What do you see happening in this short term, economically, if anything, after that decision comes through? I think the replacement is next week, right? I think it's Monday or Tuesday where the next British Prime Minister is announced.
Look, there's a lot of uncertainty in the UK for obvious reasons. Parts of their economy, the parts with the most exposure to the rest of the European economy, have been on tenterhooks for quite some time now. London is famous for the size of its financial community, and a lot of those jobs might move offshore if England can't trade as freely with the EU. But I think we really have to look at the big picture of the debate last night. We're talking about an incredibly important decision, a decision which places enormous risks and costs on the UK, including the possibility of shortages of things like energy in the short term, because France might not be able to export energy across the Channel Tunnel to the UK, yet you have Boris Johnson waving a dried fish around in a debate talking about postage costs. And look, let's face it, Boris Johnson did a great job of leading the Brexit debate. He lied about the costs, he lied about the billions of dollars that could be spent on public health if Brexit happened. It was a shamelessly successful campaign. Now he's like the dog that caught the car he was chasing, and the showmanship continues. But no answers for the English about how this might really work if he succeeds.
Well, he also paints more to note during this campaign. But we did hear from Hunt and the man known as Bojo, which is quite cringeworthy at the moment. Let's just hear a bit of those final pitches.
We need to get our mojo back as a party. We need to get on and get out of the EU on October the 31st. Well done.
If we go about it the wrong way, the Europeans will block any changes to the deal, Parliament will block no deal, and we'll get to a general election long before we get to October the 31st.
Richard, in your view, how bad would a hard Brexit be?
I think a hard Brexit would be terrible, and the consequences won't just be terrible for the English economy in the short term, potentially, but I think it's an historic repudiation, it's a historic rejection of a collective endeavour that took a long time, a lot of political capital, a lot of effort to build. And even if England wants to get out of it, that's fair enough. It's a democracy, they could do that. To do so in such a disorderly way, to do so in such a chaotic way, I think reflects very poorly on the capacity of democracies these days to debate and discuss complex issues. If the UK doesn't want to be in the EU, that's not the end of the world, but the way they've come to that decision and the way they're now chasing a hard Brexit as a way to make a political point rather than a way to improve the lives of their citizens, I think it should be deeply concerning.
All right. Richard Denniss, the Chief Economist at the Australia Institute, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Coming up on AM Agenda with